Well, hello there, guys. Welcome back to another edition of Ariel's new DM channel here on YouTube. And today, I starting a new topic. I know it's been a while since I dropped a video, but I've been studying my AD&D Advanced Dungeons and Dragons old manuals, and I think it's pretty interesting playing in a weekly couple of sessions of 5e currently, the current version of the game, and to look back at some of the the earlier editions. I've done this on this channel many times, and in fact, I'm not unique in doing so, because there are other YouTubers out there who have done the same thing and have thoroughly examined um, first edition and older editions of Dungeons and Dragons. But um, my purpose um, today was to take a look and see, and my purpose as a DM or as an aspiring DM running a 5e adventure and having played sporadically through the earlier editions of the game back in the 80s and um, yeah, back in the day. It, I did play sporadic, as I said, um, 1E in college and later on with family, friends, what have you. And one thing that I wanted, that I'm very much, I wish I could play first. I mean, I'd jump at the chance of playing either online or in person on our first edition campaign, but that's not going to happen because of logistics and group settings. I mean, it could happen, but it's unlikely that I'll be playing uh, anything other than 5e in the foreseeable future. Um, that's just because that's what product is out there and what we're all playing. So I've been looking at the old manuals, and I got this idea to incorporate the some of the older rules, because there's nothing that says that you cannot take away piecemeal, piece by piece, um different versions of the game that you like, or the or mechanics that you want to incorporate into fifth edition. And that is the purpose of today's discussion. I think I'm going to do several attempt to do several videos of this sort, where I talk about what could work in a campaign, or what I think will work for me. And maybe you can take some of this away as well, and look up some of the older edition game mechanics and incorporate them into your current 5e game. So that will be the topic of a series of videos that hopefully will be coming your way if you are a regular viewer of this channel. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to touch upon was combat mechanics that I think work really well in Dungeons and Dragons First Edition, and that can be ported over to 5e. And if we take a look at the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition Player's Handbook, if you have access to that online, you probably Google it, and there's some link to it. Um, I was looking on Etsy and eBay and those type of places, and man, these books are expensive. I own them for a number of years now, but if you were to get them hard copies online, it would run you a pretty hard copies would run you a pretty either hard to find or run you a pretty good penny, unless you know of a place like a used bookstore stuff that carries them. And if you do find them in good condition, I would snap them up as quick as you can, because they're not cheap. But at any rate, um, if you turn to the Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 1E handbook, player's handbook, on page 102. Um, Curiously enough, the combat rules are not spelled out very well, I think, or they're not organized that well. A lot of them are sprinkled on the player's handbook, and then you'll find a more detailed explanation of some things like surprise on, surprise during a melee combat round, like which party is surprised. Are the adventurer surprised, or the other party surprised? A group of monsters could be surprised, or nobody could be surprised. But that's a mechanic that is detailed in page 102 of the player's hand, starting with page 102 of the player's handbook. for first edition. And I would just in general terms, basically, what you do is uh, characters can be surprised just as creatures um, they encounter can also be surprised. And what you do is you basically take it's kind of complicated. I read through it, and one of the things is that some of these crunchier editions they make things a little bit sometimes it's hard it's good to it's how do I say this? It's good to have the perspective because when I first read them, I tried reading this book when I was 13 years old, really, and uh, 30 years ago or more. And when I was reading through it, I understood the concepts of some things, but some things really confused me. And maybe I was lazy and I just didn't want to put in the time to read it all, which I think people these days can uh, appreciate or at least empathize with. But the point I'm trying to make is that um, it's all over the place. It's all over the map, and sometimes it's hard to find the information. And back then, I didn't really understand, fully grasp all of it. I rereading some of this stuff with time, putting in the time, or watching some supplemental videos online. I will link to the to if I remember to, I will link. I'll try to remember to link to a couple of articles or sites that I think do a really good job, may do a better job of explaining some of those mechanics. But the surprise mechanic, they made it really hard um, with the variables. There's a lot of variables into it. But generally, what it boils down to is party A. Let's say party A, which is a group of adventurers comprised of um, composed or comprised of four, five. Let's say five adventurers versus party B or group B, which is let's say two or three uh, for the sake of simplicity, like say three or four monsters. So you have both of them roll two d6. One is two total of two d6, and you roll them and you compare the results. The book says surprise is usually expressed as a 2 in 6 chance for all parties concerned. For example, a six-sided die is rolled with a 1 or 2 indicating surprise. Some monsters are more capable of surprising foes than the normal 2 in 6 probability, and some cannot be surprised um, as easily. So they have a reduced probability 1 in 6, 1 in 8, etc. Each one, so when you roll the d6 and you get a 1, each one of surprise equals 1 segment, 6 seconds of time um, lost, 6 seconds of time lost to the surprise party. And during the last time the surprising party uh, can freely act to escape or attack or whatever. See, it's a little complex. Basically, you roll two dice and you have a probability of scoring that. The way I simplify it, if you if I'm being honest, or the way I think I'm gonna run it, if I incorporate this mechanic, is have party A roll a d6, have party B roll a d6. The highest one doesn't necessarily win the surprise round, but basically you subtract. I'm sorry, the highest one does win. So if you like, let's say party A rolls a 4, party B rolls a 2. So obviously party A would win, and then you subtract uh, the one die from the other to get the total result. 4 minus 2 is 2, so that's 2 segments of surprise. So during the whole round, uh, the party with the lowest score will be surprised for 2 segments. And what the hell is a segment? That's a whole nother kind of worm. And that's a difference from 5e that we don't have and that I probably should have explained before going into the mechanics. So let me do that now so that you can have a full grasp of how time used to work because time was a more important, I feel, other than the parties outdoors and the adventure during the day and during night. 5e is kind of like in a video game setting where you have a party going out, for example, and they're in a town and they spend some actions in a town, whether it be combat or non-combat, whatever they're doing in town, exploration, talking to somebody in a tavern, and then it turns into night. And so they might have to decide, which actually has happened in one of my recent campaigns, decide whether they're going to go on a quest or finish one objective, wait, rest in the tavern, or put up a tent or sleep, get some rest, uh, heal older, uh, heal older, prepare and heal older wounds, and recover hit points, and then go out the following day because it's easier to adventure or less dangerous to adventure during the day than at night, theoretically. So that is a lot of time consideration, but that's more uh, day and night time. I'm talking about like time during you're in a dungeon and you're in a combat scenario. How do we deal with time then? And 5e doesn't really address it too much, but the earlier editions did. And I will really quickly go over time so that you can understand better how this impacts the way surprise, initiative, and combat, those type of things used to happen in the first edition versus what we have now. Okay, guys, I was digging around the internet, and lately I've been watching some first edition videos that have been done really well. There is, for example, this site, the Elliot Cannon, where he talks about, he's a game designer, has an official page, or has a blog or a author page, and he talks about first edition combat basics, and he talks about surprise initiative. So here's the way he breaks down the time combat rounds is basically the way it used to work is one round is 1 minute, and that is further divided into segments. So one segment is 1/10 of a round, and if you do the basic math, it's 6 seconds. So he says that he uses one 6 second segment per attack round, um, and then he talks about combat tables and a bunch of other different type of mechanics. But I just wanted to go over the time in the combat route. So the way it basically works in first edition is you have 10-minute rounds in a melee. So it's made of 10 minutes. And what's a round? A round is 1 minute, so it's 10 minute. Oh, I'm sorry, 10-minute turns. So a whole turn will take 10 minutes. But these 10 minutes are broken down into rounds, and a round is a minute. And so he says that, and then furthermore, in addition to that, the round is broken into segments, and the segments are 6 seconds. So 6 times 10 equals 60, which is a minute. So a round is a minute, and 10 of those will give you a whole turn. About turn. This is for melee combat turns. He says he uses one 6 second segment per attack round, and the way I've seen it described, and I think it works really well, is so you break it down into 10 segments of 6 seconds, and in those 10 segments, a lot is going to happen. But the early segments are going to be taken up by mostly by surprise if one of the two parties is surprised, and we already talked about how surprise works. So you roll 2d6, preferably of different colors, to tell apart one group from the other. So a group of adventurers will roll like a d6 that's a red, let's say, and then the monsters or another party that are opposing in battle will roll a blue d6. And like I said, the book has all kinds of rule probabilities. I make it really simple, and I say, okay, whoever rolls the highest, let's say the party gets a 6, the monsters get a 4. You subtract 6 from 4 is 2, and that's the number of segments. The number of segments that the party is gonna, or the group, the losing group, I guess this way of putting, is gonna be surprised. Because when you're surprised, you can't do anything. You can't attack. Well, you can't take actions, battle actions. Like you can't really do anything. You have surprise, so the other group has advantage on you. Just that one for that one specific turn or round rather for that specific round. So when the round ends, which is 10 segments after 1 minute, you go ahead and roll for initiative again, and uh, and then you start over again. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly, but I think what I'm going to do is I am going to turn to the example that they have in the book, and that will give you they have a really good explanation of it. Um, like an example, if you bear with me. All right, here's the example of combat. This is found on page 105 of the player's handbook. Let's say there's a party of 5 characters: a magic user, a cleric, a thief, which is a rogue in later editions, a human fighter, and a dwarf fighter, surprise, and illusionist with 20 orcs. The opponents are 30 feet distant. Now, the book talks about the distance and how you should calculate distance after surprise, but we don't really worry about distance too much, other because in 5e it's a specified number of distance. 5 squares equals 30 feet. So as long as they're within melee range, they can attack each other. If they're further away, they can take an action to get closer or use a ranged weapon or cast a spell. So anyway, uh, the opponents are 30 feet apart, and the magic user immediately begins casting a sleep spell. The cleric also prepares to cast a spell, Silence. He's casting a spell called Silence, which has a 15 feet radius. Meanwhile, the thief darts to the rear of the party to attempt to hide in the shadows and attack from behind when opportunity presents itself. The human fighter uh, chucks an arrow and shoots it at the illusionist, and the dwarf hurls an axe. The surprise segment is now over, and initiative is determined. Um, the illusionist slash orcs win the initiative, and while the former begins a spell of his own, the latter rushes to attack, hurling spears as they come. And I'm not gonna go through the whole thing, but basically you get the idea. There's a lot of actions that happen during a round of combat, and these are broken down into segments. So you have the 10 segments where a lot can happen in those 10 different segments. And then after again, 1 segment equals 6 seconds. 6 times 10 is 60. So you have a minute, and that's a round. So all of this will take up 1 minute of game time. And then once that round is over, you go ahead and roll initiative again to determine who has the advantage. And you can go from there. Now, I think this is a great mechanic, and I'm going to try to incorporate it into my games because what tends to happen in the 5th edition games, at least in my table, I'm sure others have um, the same or similar experience, is okay, so it gets kind of mechanical and it's not as engaging, I think, because let's say you have the same party, 5 adventurers versus like a bunch of monsters. So you roll for initiative in the beginning, whether you use a group initiative. Uh, 1st edition here uses a group initiative, so you can assign a leader of the party and say, okay, this leader, the party, he's gonna kind of roll for the party, and then the same for the other group. But uh, in 5e, it's like, okay, we can roll individual initiative, and so the wizard goes for let's say all the characters rolled, and then the monsters rolled pretty poorly, so they're gonna go last, which happens from time to time. So so the wizard gets a turn, and the barbarian gets a turn, and the bard gets a turn. Everybody gets a turn, and so if you're playing a character and you take your action, even if you get a second attack, which happens a lot too, because some classes give you a second attack, like a barbarian at a higher level will get more than one attack. So you do your attacks. But what happens if your initiative is way low? Like, let's say the barbarian was the top of initiative, and then the other character that you're playing is a spellcaster or some other class, and you're last in initiative. So you have to wait around until your turn comes all the way around, and you can be preparing your action, which a lot of players do, but it's kind of boring. It's not as engaging as the 1st edition, which has a time element, because and it's more dynamic. Something is always happening. You can and there's flexibility. Let's say your fighters that are frontline that went during a segment are getting really beat up. And so you as a cleric, you're playing a healer or you're playing a cleric and you want to heal, you can use your act. You can see what's happened before and then use your action to heal some of their damage. Um, and that might take some time because some spell casting takes time. And so maybe you'll spend your entire segment uh, in the round healing a character, and then when it comes back to you, you'll complete it maybe after a couple of segments. It's not automatic, uh, but you're doing something. You're always the thing is you're always doing something. You're always engaged. You're not sitting around your phone, which I've seen people do, and texting or playing cards or waiting for their turn to roll all the way around. And also, it has the benefit of getting the opposing party engaged too, because I was DMing a game when I was new, and I forgot about. I even forgot to. I was checking everything, and I forgot to check or account for initiative in battle for the monsters, and so all the characters were taking their turns and beating up on these poor monsters. And then by the time he finally got around to them, they were like at half or almost dead, or or easy fodder because they got so many more attacks. So you want to avoid that. Um, you don't make the same new mistake that I made when it comes to initiative. But if you incorporate this system, I would encourage you to look into it and see if that is something that you want to do, because I think it is a really good way to keep players engaged. You know, so he this author talks about how he compresses combat down to 1 6-second segment for one round, and he also rounds up movement distances in combat to 20 feet per segment. So what's written in the he said this is a good analogy. He says think of basketball players actively defending. Legs are bent, moving, strafing, shuffle, stepping. This is similar to melee combat. You can fight, attack, and actively defend over the course of 6 seconds and move 20 feet. Um, and the UFC octagon is 30 feet across or a 15-foot radius as a point of reference. So think of enemies and players engaged in melee range as groups. Reroll initiative when more enemies join the group or if players switch targets. This helps keep track of those whose turn it is. It's easy to lose track of the turn, so you don't want to do that. Um, but uh, but he's saying he compresses the time. You can do it that way too. There's a lot of variations. Like I said, the book gets kind of complex and gets kind of, I think, gets a little bit needlessly crunchy, or they make something that should be simple a little bit too complex. But 5e goes all the way the other spectrum of the gamut where things are really simple and the characters almost have advantage on everything. So not always, but not as a general rule, but a lot of the times, especially at higher levels, I feel. So I think incorporating this mechanic of battle into your games might be a good solution to keep more players engaged and to make it a little bit more as realistic as it can get in a fantasy based type combat. So I hope you like this video. I will make more with some of the mechanics that I want to incorporate into 5e. I will also, as I say, link this article to the description if you're interested in finding out more. And as always, enjoy playing Dungeons and Dragons. If you like this video, don't forget to hit the like or give it a like or subscribe. And may the rolls be with you.